Hey everyone, it's David Barnett from davidcbarnett.com, the blog site, YouTube channel, iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, Spitcher. There's no such thing as Spitcher. It's Stitcher, and any other place where they'll host my podcast. You can find it, David C. Barnett. And today I've got Rob Goddard, who's joining us from the UK. How are you today, Rob?
Excellent, Dave. It's good to be online with you to talk about some stuff.
Well, I'm glad to have you here because you and I connected after a couple of exchanges on LinkedIn, and you are the owner of a business brokerage in the UK. And one of the exchanges that we had that led to a conversation really piqued my interest for two reasons. Number one, in your business brokerage, you offer businesses for sale, but you don't set asking prices. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. And number two, you started to talk about the process that you use to vet your sellers and the work that you do with sellers before bringing a business to market. And I thought that your process is very, very different from most of the business brokerages that exist in the world, where, of course, the brokers are eager to obtain a listing because they want to add something to their inventory and get it up there for sale. Yours is a little more cautionary route, and you weed out a lot of people who probably aren't ready. And I want to talk about that as well. But first, let's talk a little bit about your background so people have an idea of what your experience is, because I believe that you got into business brokerage around the 2008 Great Recession, did you not? Well, the same time I did.
Actually, before that,
Okay.
but working for myself in 2008, yes, that was a great career decision. Going from a really comfortable, highly paid job in M&A in November 2008, just a week before Lehman Brothers went bust and the world went mad in the banking crisis.
Okay. So your M&A experience extends further back than that.
Yeah,
Why don't we get
I
into
had
that?
seven years prior to that working for a large M&A brokerage in the UK, and I
Okay.
was general manager, and I learnt what to do and also learnt what doesn't work. And it was out of 7 years as an apprentice, as a general manager. I thought, do you know what? I can do better. So I had the courage of my convictions, and I left the security of employment and set up as a one-man band with a broadband connection from a bedroom. That's it.
Okay. And you've been successful over the last few years. And that today you actually have four different businesses that are running.
I do, yeah.
What before you got into M&A, what were you doing before then?
First 20 years was banking. So I've always been in financial services.
Okay.
And so that was the first half of my career. I spent a year living in LA in working for a food ministry, living in a commune, would you believe? Not in Beverly Hills, a place called Chino, which is kind of away from Rodeo Drive. So I spent a year there, feeding and housing Hispanics mainly and low income families, and then that was my boot camp. And then I came back to the UK, and I knew I didn't want to go back into banking.
Okay.
Definitely.
So it's kind of a year to decompress and rethink what your life was going to be.
Yeah, and I entered the world of SMEs when I came back from California in 1998, and I've stayed in the world of SMEs since then, both working for running other people's businesses, and then in 2008, as you mentioned, then I set up and I thought working for myself would give me so much time, so much money. I'd have so much leisure time, I wouldn't know what to do with it, and I'd be in control, 100% control of my company.
Well, it's true. I tell people that if you work for yourself, you only have to work half days. It's up to you which 12 hours that'll be.
Exactly. 24/7. And of course, for 7 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You had sent me this whole big list here of sort of questions or challenges that you put business sellers through. Why don't we start off by talking about this, because you describe them as weak sellers. You don't want to bring a weak seller to the market. What what was the beginning of this? Was it your experience at the M&A firm? Is this so? I'm guessing you
Exactly.
had some deals that fell apart because the sellers ultimately had problems.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, or what it was. At best, it was 1 in 3 converted in this large brokerage that I was general manager of in a good month, um, dropping down typically to 1 in 10. So that's a 90% failure rate. So in that
But
situation,
that
then
meant that that business was probably pretty on par with the performance of the industry
indeed, yeah,
from what we know. Yeah.
yeah, compared to the industry, it was doing quite well at 1 in 3. Um, and of course, what happens with a business model, financial model like that, the focus is on retainers, which I know is a different situation in the US, but in the UK, it's pretty typical to charge a retainer each month and then a percentage success fee at the end of it. So what's happened in the UK industry is that the vast majority of intermediaries are focused on the retainers. So that's about getting new clients in, regardless of whether it was a saleable business or not, taking them to market and hoping for the best.
Well, whenever I've talked about the business brokerage business, I've always talked about how there are two distinct sales cycles. There's the broker selling their service to the business owner, come and list your business with me. And then once that's been completed and you've secured the listing, then it's the second sales cycle where you have to find a buyer and get them to buy the business. And so, if it's really difficult to get buyers to buy the businesses, then it makes perfect sense that that's where the brokers spend their time, is trying to get the listings.
Yeah, and it's a lumpy financial model. I mean, there aren't many businesses, but Evolution is one of them. That's hence the company name. We evolved, and what we wanted to do, and what I want to do from day one, and now the team, it's part of our value system, is to be highly selective as to who we take to market and when. And I have been accused a few times over the years by people that have wanted us to instruct us to sell their business, and we won't take it on. And I've been accused of being too selective and to take a chance. I said, well, look, I can take £50,000 from you in a retainer over the next 12 months, but we're not going to sell it for the price that you're looking for. And I can't do that ethically.
Well, and this is what came up in our prior conversation that we had last week, is that when I had my business brokerage, I would do an evaluation of the business, and then I would tell the seller what I believed it would sell for, and I would tell them what I thought the asking price should be. And if they wanted to vary too much from that, I wasn't interested in taking them, just because I knew then that I would be wasting my time, because it just wouldn't. The asking price, and we're going to talk more about this later, in my mind, is a signal in the marketplace. And if the asking price doesn't make sense, what you're doing is you're signaling to the educated, reasonable buyers that you don't know what you're doing. And
exactly.
And so those buyers are going to look at that and go, I don't think I have the time to invest in trying to educate that broker and that seller that what they're doing doesn't make sense. And so they spend their time elsewhere. So the price has to make sense. And I know you have a different method, but I had lots of people walk out on me because they didn't want to enter the market at the price I suggested, only to have them come back a year later when their engagement expired with one of my competitors.
Yeah. I mean, so it was initially, it was my passion and my value system and ethics, and now it's the whole company that we share, and makes us different in our marketplace. That we're very honest with a potential seller to say, look, this is what it's probably worth today. And we usually give a range because these things can't be too precise, but usually they want double or treble what it's really worth, what their P&L and balance sheet might indicate, perhaps. So we tend to take it from another way, which is to ask them what their magic number is. And they answer the question the wrong way round. They start trying to value their business. And we have to stop them and say, no, your magic number is the number that you want your business to be worth in order to finish one chapter in your life and start a new one. So we can't come up with that number for you. That's your number, your magic number. And they only come up with one of 4 answers, David.
$1 million. £1 million?
Or $1 million if you're in the States. Million, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million. Depends on the size of the SME. And if there's 4 shareholders, in a typical SME business, they'll want 4 million,
Yeah,
3 shareholders, 3 million.
of course.
Yeah. So we have a bit of fun on that. And the pricing, did you want to delve into that now?
Well, let's talk about. You've got 12 things on your list of
Yes.
sort of let's call them hurdles that you make
Hurdles.
sellers
Yeah.
jump over, that they have to kind of qualify themselves to you. So let's talk about that. So the first one is the seller's not committed emotionally and financially to selling their business. What do you mean by that? The emotion. I think I know what I mean, but let's talk about it for the viewers. What do you
Often,
mean about this emotional commitment?
yeah, I found in the early years, I found that 1 in 3 business sellers changed their mind
Hmm.
mid-process, which is crazy, isn't it? They've started paying some fees. They're certainly committing time, effort, and energy. And you get a phone call saying, look, it's gone well, usually around offer time. They're getting offers coming in. And they're saying, look, we've had some offers. They're above our aspirational price. But do you know what? We're going to take it off the market. Your team have done a great job, Rob, but we're going to take it off the market. We're going to leave it a couple of years, grow it, and then come back to you. So when I used to get those phone calls, I just said, what are you frightened of? Because it doesn't make sense. You're getting more than you were originally looking for in your heart of hearts. Now you're seeing offers coming in from credible buyers, and now you want to take it off the market. And what it is, of course, is it's not a financial transaction selling a business, it's an emotional one.
Hmm.
And it's about letting go of something that perhaps you started, you've given birth, you've nurtured it, it's grown up. And do you really want to let it go? So, and I speak as an owner manager of 4 businesses, and they're my 4 children. It's like selling your child to a stranger. So we want to make sure that the seller isn't going to let us down, because we don't, whilst we charge a retainer, our profit is locked up in the success fee on the transaction. So I don't want sellers wasting my team's time and affecting our bank balance adversely by pulling out. So that is the first. So you did mention that it's a bit like American Gladiator, because there's 12 hurdles for a seller. There's only 2 for a buyer.
Well,
So it's
we're going to
6
get
times
to.
harder for a
We're going to
seller
get to.
to persuade us to take them on.
Okay, so because you want to make sure that they qualify. So
Yeah.
we talked about the emotional commitment, and then number 2 is the unrealistic price aspirations. We've already touched upon that. The
Yeah.
1, 3, 5, or 10 million.
We always ask, how did you get, before we laugh, we say, how did you get to that number? And there's no mathematics, no science usually. It's gut feel.
So for buyers out there, the affordability of businesses really comes down to the rate of inflation. I mean,
Yes.
as the currencies devalue, the businesses will become more affordable.
Hey, look,
Because the prices won't change.
UK businesses have been great for the foreign buyer, because we're 20% cheaper because of Brexit, because of the exchange rate dropped against the dollar.
There you go. Yeah, well, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Number 3 is owner-reliant businesses.
Don't touch them.
I mean, you've got a small, dental practice, for example, with one dentist. I mean, that obviously is an owner-reliant business, but we know exactly who the buyer is going to be. It's going to be another dentist. Talk about it, though, in some of these bigger businesses that still have this reliance on one person.
Yeah, and I'm sure this doesn't apply to any one of your viewers. But do you know, I'll let you into a secret, David, and your following. There are some business owners out there that are control freaks. Let go of anything. They need to be in the center of the universe. They are a legend in their own. So whilst that's fun to meet people like that, and I guess, you have to be confident, I think, to start and grow a successful business. You have to believe in yourself. But I think there's a time at which it's good to listen to the wise counsel of others. So an owner-reliant business is almost unsaleable, almost, and we won't touch them. We can choose who we take on. That's one of our hurdles. An owner-reliant business, the only way that you're going to sell it is if the buyer has already got a ready-made replacement, managing director or a president,
I
CEO.
I often liken it to the buyer has to be a person with similar if they're going to run the business themselves, they have to be a person with similar background and experience, just 20 years younger. And it's almost
Yeah,
like a mini me replacement.
yeah,
And
yeah. I mean, most people we have a conversation with that are looking at evolution to represent them to sell their business. When we get to the owner reliance piece, which is quite common, because they say the business runs itself, which we take with a pinch of salt. Because later on in the conversation, we say, well, how do you fill your 70 hours a week then? If the business runs itself, what do you do? And of course, the truth comes out then that they're at the center of everything, whether it's operations, finance, sales, customer care, they're involved in almost everything. So we say to them, just consider this. The only way you're going to sell your business is if you stay on for 2 to 3 years and become an employee. And guess what? The new owner that you sold your shares to is going to tell you what to do. How do you like that? Because most business owners I found are like me. I'm unemployable.
mm,
I've tasted I've tasted what it's like to make your own decisions and be in control of your own destiny. And there's no 80 odd % of our former clients could not work for anyone longer than a week. So,
yeah,
and
I'm
when you put that,
laughing because I know how true
oh
this
God,
is. I mean,
also for a buyer, David, there's a concern from the buyer because they're thinking, well, if I buy this business from John, he could be a lightning rod for dissatisfaction the day after the business is purchased because they could be critical of the changes I make in
mhm.
the company I now own. They could be a loose cannon. So it doesn't work for the buyer too well
Well, and it's
either.
confusing. It's confusing for other staff because there's a new owner, but the old owner is still there.
Yeah,
And the new person may not be as decisive in their decision making in the beginning because they're still learning. And so if they're deferring to the old owner to make decisions, all of a sudden there's a confusion of authority, and
indeed.
it can create all kinds of problems in a
It's
business.
messy. But again, just by having that honest conversation with a potential client, saying, look, this is the reality. This is a reality check. Can you work for someone else? And because the majority say no, not longer than at the time it takes to hand over the factory keys.
Well,
So
it's interesting because I've had a past guest on the show. I think you know him, Mike Finger,
yes,
from the
yeah.
States. And when when he was preparing to sell his business, he actually rented a separate office space for himself alone.
Ah,
And
I think that's wise.
he wouldn't go to the main office because he knew that he would interject himself into everything if he were present.
You can't help it. You have the knowledge, you have the background and the history and the legacy. It's I think that yeah, that's wisdom. But that's Mike.
Yeah,
He's wise.
he is. Um, Number four is a supplier reliant business. I see this quite often, and people don't understand how the whole business teeters on that one commercial relationship. It's almost worse than a customer concentration problem.
I agree. I put it on a par personally. It's a no-no for us because when we unpack this in a 2-hour discussion with a prospective client, they play it down. They say, "Well, no, I could find other suppliers." I say, "Well, why haven't you?" "Oh, well, I know Bill." "Oh, right. So you, as the owner, you've got a personal relationship with Bill." "Yeah." "So, but you're not going. You're going. So who has that relationship with Bill?" And maybe he doesn't like the fact that you've gone. Maybe he starts then looking around for other businesses to replace your one
Hmm.
in the supply chain. So um, I think a lot of business owners miss it. They don't really get it. And so one of the things we encourage them to do is to look at multi-supply arrangements. And if they've only got one supplier, to find 2 or 3 others that maybe not split it 3 ways equally, but certainly have contracts in place and relationships in place with other suppliers just to take away some of that risk for an acquirer down the line.
See, in my past, I worked for bigger businesses, and there was at one point, young David was considering a career in purchasing, and I met a lot of people in that world. And I remember there was this one business that I knew some people there, and they told me that they actually split some of their supply to a secondary supplier, even though they had to pay more for that product. They didn't get the volume discounts because they wanted an ongoing relationship with another supply source.
Yeah.
And it was a strategic decision not to optimize profit, but to make sure that was redundancy in supply. And that those people were all professionally trained and educated purchasers. And so oftentimes what we have with a small business is we have a generalist business owner who's an expert in their trade, but they don't necessarily have all of the insights into every little facet of the business that they've been forced to take on over the course of time. And so it can lead to these kinds of problems. I always point to the book Shoe Dog, the Phil Knight story, the story of Nike, because that entire book is about the risk of a supplier relationship until Nike got to the point where they were making their own shoes. They were always at the mercy of the Japanese company that they were importing for. And there were several times when they almost lost that contract. The whole company would have just folded.
Yeah. And it goes back to risk management, doesn't it? The higher the risk, the lower the price an acquirer is going to pay.
Right.
It's straightforward, but I think with business owners, they miss it because they've gotten used to it. They've got complacent. They think because they've had the relationship 10 years with Bill, it's always going to be there. And of course, acquirers look at it very differently. They look at it afresh. They look at the risk. They don't have that legacy and that history.
Right. Right.
So the other thing with suppliers, and it's the same with clients, if you're over-reliant on a client, is there could be a no-novation clause. I don't know whether it's the same in North America, in the contract, where the supplier or even the client can say no to an acquisition.
Yeah, we see this in dealer relationships.
Right.
So if you're the dealer of Suzuki motorcycles, for example, then yeah, they can approve or decline on who the new person is, because of course they're worried about the brand name they own, right? That you're kind of renting as a dealer. That's their concern.
And there might be some sensitivity with the potential new acquirer. There may be a conflict of interest with the single source supplier for some reason in the background. It might be a security issue. It might be the country of origin. So yeah, multi-source supply. If you want to sell your business for a premium price, it's multi-source supply every time.
And the next one on the list, of course, is client concentration, which is a little more obvious to people. If half of your sales come from 3 clients, then obviously the buyer is thinking, oh my God, if I lose one of these, the business may not be profitable anymore. And again, it amazes me how business owners will not want, I don't know if it's some kind of cognitive dissonance or an avoidance of the topic in their own mind, but they do not want to, deal with the problem. Again, they say, well, they've been buying from me for 25 years. Why would they change? And, there's all kinds of reasons. Like, what if they get acquired by someone in the industry who has their own relationship, right? And the truth is that any number of things could happen. That big customer could be an owner of shopping centers, and there might be a global pandemic. Like, we don't know.
You're right, and we informally we have a threshold beyond which we start asking some more searching questions. If there's more than 15% of turnover with one client, that's an amber light.
Yeah.
If it's more than 30%, that's a red light. If a third of your revenue almost comes from one customer, and really care if it's, because sometimes they say, oh, well, it's one customer, but they have different sites. So so if the group makes some sort of change in purchasing decision, you lose them all.
Yeah.
So I think some of it, there's probably some cognitive distancing, but I think it's because if they accept what we're saying, it means there's a lot of hard work coming down the track now, because now they've got to find new business, new clients to dilute that reliance. And they're thinking about selling their business. And now they've got someone saying, it's going to be really hard to sell, if not impossible. You're going to have to find new clients. That's going to take you 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So maybe you shouldn't be selling today. Maybe you should have a medium-term plan to exit.
And in my experience, when people get to the point of talking with professionals about selling their business, then they are already starting to let go in their mind. And when you start to talk about finding new customers, well, that's a re-engagement. That's a whole new effort. That's trying to get excited again. And a lot of them, that's not where they want to be.
Look, I know over the years we've lost potential clients to competitors, but I can sleep at night. We ring them up in a year's time to see whether they've sold their business through a competitor, and 90% of the time they haven't. In fact, they're quite often very disappointed and bruised, and they've spent money and got either no meetings, no offers, and they're disillusioned. And you try to stop yourself from saying, I did tell you, but they don't want to listen. And a lot of business owners, in fact, the large majority, over the 20 years I've been doing this, once they've got an idea in their head, it's really hard to shift it. Really hard. They, for whatever reason, they want to sell. And sadly, some business owners sell at a discount, or they don't sell at all, having spent money.
Well, I once the expectation has been incorrectly set, I agree. It's really hard to change. When I had my office open, there was a local competitor that I would sometimes compete against. And I had been handed some of the valuation calculations that they had done. And there was a conceptual error in the valuation methodology that they were using, which double counted operating capital. And so every business they listed for sale was overpriced by the operating capital in the business.
Oh, wow. Right.
And so they actually had a reputation for overpricing businesses, but they didn't understand what they were doing wrong.
Mm.
But once someone had been there and spent a year with them, and then they wanted to come over to me, I would show them what the business was worth and why. And many of those people spent another year on the fence before they were willing to list, because they weren't willing to let go of that other number, even when I showed them why it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I think that it has to do with, in their mind, they had already allocated those funds for what they were going to buy. New camper and a sailboat or whatever it is.
Yeah, you're right. It's anchored into their brain, and it's really hard to shift it. It's just the thing that we live with in our industry. We have to stay true to ourselves, and we only take on a business if we're fairly certain, A, we can sell it, and secondly, at the price that the seller, that we've agreed behind the scenes, the seller would accept.
Yeah. In number 6 on your list is a lack of financial reporting rigor.
Yeah.
So can you describe what that would mean, what that entails?
Yeah. So we sell 78% is the most recent figure. We sell 78% of what we take on. So a bit different to the industry figure I gave you at the start of this. We've reversed the market in the UK. And apart from having a talented team that do the hard work, and the fact that we're highly selective, we'll only take businesses to market that we know will sell, and there'll be strategic purchasers out there where 1 and 1 could equal 3. What we have noticed, where we don't sell a business, so look at the 1 in 5 that we don't sell, just over 20% we don't sell. Half of that is lack of financial rigor. That one reason, and that could either be that they don't know their numbers, they don't have monthly management accounts, so they might show audited accounts, but you're not selling the past, you're selling the future, and you certainly want to know, if you're buying a business, what the current situation is, because it could hide a lot of things. So we don't take businesses to market without management accounts. we do give some scrutiny to the filed accounts, to make sure they make sense. Because I used to think in my naivety, David, that a set of accounts from an accountancy firm put it registered for tax purposes was sacrosanct. And I found that accountants can interpret things in different ways. So, or present the information in different ways and justify it.
Yeah. Well, I talk about this quite often in I call it the three different accounting methods. And then of course, if you're a publicly traded firm, then you have to have all kinds of stuff for investor information, to get into your annual reports and whatnot. And if you are a large private firm, every firm needs your tax accounting done for the tax return, of course. And then the one so the public company's got information for investors, information for management, so people can make decisions. If your branches are 1,000 kilometers away, obviously you can't see what's going on there. You need some kind of information system. And this is what you're talking about, an information system that management can use to understand what's going on day to day, which is not necessarily the financial accounting that ends up in the tax returns.
Exactly.
And some of the software out there, attempts to do this, but it's only worthwhile if the information is actually put in there and updated and kept current. I was involved in a large company when they moved to Salesforce, and all of the individuals in the field were supposed to have, the sales funnel where they moved clients along to the different categories, because management wanted to know how many people were imminently going to close, a sale. And so, being the new guy, I don't know if this was hazing or not, I did my job as I was asked. And then later, as I got to know more and more people in the company, I found out that other people on Friday afternoon would just move random accounts further along the funnel so that they didn't get yelled at by their manager. And so, you've got management now making decisions and forecasts based on this information, which they believe is correct, which may or may not be. Have you ever gotten into that kind of stuff in your discussions?
Yeah, and sometimes it's either we find that where a small business starts, if they engage the village accountant, as I put it, sort of, and 30 years later, the business itself has really grown, but they haven't changed their accountant. And that worries us, because we know if we were going to take this business on to sell, it could be PwC on the other side in due diligence. And it's David and Goliath.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time looking at the financial reporting. What are the assumptions that have been made? Income recognition is a big one. Because in certain industries, it's when they recognize the income, so they can affect the bottom line profit. They can inflate it the year before sale, or they're not making the capital expenditure that they should if they've got a lot of equipment. So there is a lot that can be hidden in the account. So we spend a lot of time with that. We had a client a couple of years ago that engaged us to sell their business. And in the preparation phase, before we went to market and we're getting all the information together, we said, can we have your latest set of accounts? He said, which ones do you want? We said, well, the last 3 years. He said, no. Do you want the real ones or the ones I supply to the authorities? Right. So we stopped the project because there's no way we're going to take a business to market that's got dodgy accounts. English expression, I know. But I bounced it back to him and said, look, I'm not taking an ethical stance on what you've been doing. All I'm saying is, how would you feel if we put you in front of several of your direct competitors who might want to buy your business, and it becomes clear that you've been evading tax? How are you going to feel about that? So they're not all as extreme as that, but there's usually accountancy principles that seem to be quite flexible. And we know from experience of doing this, it's going to unravel in due diligence. So we want it sorted. We want to understand it, and we want to regularize the account so that we know when we get in front of the buyer's acquisition team that we're not going to have any surprises. And if there are some things that can't be unraveled before we go to market, then we need to disclose that to
Right.
the buyer before they make an offer.
And I think, just to give people who are listening an example of what you're talking about, and this is a really simple example, but it's one that I've seen quite often. When you recognize the sale, so I've seen a lot, for example, of fitness businesses, gymnasiums and such,
Yeah.
and people will come in and they'll buy a 1-year membership, and for simplicity's sake, the business will recognize it as a sale. Maybe it's $120 for the annual membership. I know that's not a real price, but they'll record it on that day. But in reality, what the sale that they've made is they made a $10 sale for this month's workouts, and they owe the customer $110 worth of exercise. And so, done properly, you would record it as a deferred revenue, as an obligation, or money borrowed from the clientele.
Yeah.
But it's almost never done this way, except when you get into more sophisticated businesses where they're actually trying to push revenue into future periods because they don't want the tax liability brought into the present, right? And so, in much bigger businesses, there's all kinds of room for policy changes that can have a material outcome on what the bottom line is. You raised one, depreciation. And I've always been taught that in bigger companies, that's the place where the stuff can be hidden, because it's so difficult for anyone to come in and audit and find out that certain pieces of equipment have been put into the wrong class. They're being depreciated more quickly, or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, a lot of most accountants and buyers will have a multiple of bottom line profit, and that depreciation figure can affect it significantly.
On top of financial reporting, where you've got skeletons in the cupboard and tax irregularities as numbers 6, 7, and 8, what kind of skeleton? Can you give us an example of a skeleton in the cupboard that you found?
Yeah, criminal record.
Okay.
Only
you don't believe in second chances, Rob? Come on.
Yeah, we are all sinners. That's what he said to me. It came up. We weren't in due diligence, fortunately, but it came up with one prospective buyer. We sat around the table, and he showed something from the internet, which is our client had spent 6 months in jail for stalking a woman. In fact, he ended up in the back seat of her car without her knowledge one evening, and did 6 months in jail. So those sorts of things aren't helpful in a negotiation because we can all fall short of the legal system sometimes. But the fact that he didn't share it with us, he hid it. It comes up because buyers are going to do some early due diligence. They want to find out, because they're not only buying the business, they want to see about the integrity of the owner. Because if he can do that and spend some time inside and hide it, then what else is he hiding in the business? So that's what I mean by skeletons. The internet's a wonderful thing, but nothing's ever lost in the internet.
Well, and the goodwill of that business could be impacted. There could be people in the marketplace who know about the criminal case, who may choose not to do business with that company, and that stigma can be attached to it even after a transaction.
Well, another one, it was a company we actually sold. Right, this is quite a few years ago. We sold them, and then the buyer contacted me a month later and said, "I need to have a private word with you, Rob. The company that we bought through you, we found all sorts of folders in the filing cabinet. Now that we own the business, they've been doing a clear out, and they found court papers that our client, from going back years and years, where it had been done for copyright fraud." So now, there's things that happen, and I'm sure something like that, where you've been prosecuted successfully, and it is pertinent to the business. You make the decision: do I want to sell? If I do want to sell, I've got to disclose this information at some point, and it certainly has to be before an offer is made. Because if it comes out after an offer, they're going to chip on price. They're going to use that as leverage. So that's what I mean by skeletons. It doesn't happen all the time. The reason these examples sit in my mind, despite the passage of time, is they are fairly rare. But we do some due diligence on a prospective client. We do go on the internet. We put their name in and see what comes up, because that's what a buyer will do.
Yeah. Great points. Number 9, owner does not have an open mind as to who might buy them.
Yeah.
I ran into this. I ran into this just a couple of weeks ago. A trucking company, and the owner, really believes that the buyer is going to be someone who's going to come and buy them and do business the way they do it in the same location, with under the same circumstances. And I said, buddy, your industry is filled with these giant companies who may simply want to acquire you for the equipment in the accounts, and let's pack up the office. But he wasn't willing to understand that this is a possibility.
I know. Again, it goes back to my comment. When you've, particularly with business owners that have got quite a successful business, they tend to listen to their own hype, and they believe in what they're thinking, and their central point is that they're right. And so the way that we try to unlock that with a prospective client is to repeatedly say to them, keep an open mind. You might be right. It might be the 1 or 2 companies that you've mentioned, or it could be a company that you've never heard of in the industry, maybe in a different country, that has the most strategic reason to purchase you. So just keep an open mind. Most business owners are quite blinky. The horse racing, they wear the blinkers. We try and take the blinkers off. And I've been doing this 20 years, and I've been responsible and overseen 356 successful transactions in 20 years. Half that time, the buyers, at least half the time, those buyers, eventual buyers, didn't come from an obvious source. So we know that the right fit acquirer at the right price may not be on their radar, but we'll find them.
Okay. And then the follow-on one, number 10, is owner inflexibility regarding a deal structure. This is the same sort of thing. They've been told, and we run into this a lot in Canada because there's tax advantages to selling shares. Sellers will say, no, this is the way it has to be. And I'll say, well, do you know what the tax liability is if you sell the assets? And they have no idea.
They have no idea. No, it regularly comes up because, in fact, it happened a couple of years ago. We sold a business. Well, the client that we took on, she wanted 10 to 12 million pounds for her business. And she wanted it all cash on completion, no deferred structure at all.
Unmarked bills?
in an airport lounge with a couple of Versace suitcases. And she didn't want to sell to private equity and venture capitalists because she'd heard that they're really nasty people. They'll just strip the business. And she wasn't going to stay on for longer than 3 months. So cash on completion, no private equity or VCs, and 3-month handover.
Right.
So we said to her, look, keep an open mind. She said, no, I know what you're saying, Rob. I know exactly what I want. Anyway, we sold that business in just over a year. We sold it for 22 million, not 10. A 4-year stay on period because, and it was a private equity firm in the US that bought. Now, when I after we had the success fee come through into our bank account, I challenged her on it. I said, you told me these were your 3 must-haves, and all 3 of them were broken. She said, well, I fell in love with the business again because we had the right fit buyer. So I think often with business owners, they've been they need a re-injection of energy, enthusiasm, and vision. And that can come with the right strategic acquirer.
Right.
So look, she got 22 million. Okay, it was spread over 4 years, but she got a cash on completion number as well in that 22.
What was exciting for her about this is the new buyers brought the resources to achieve things that she'd always wanted to do and couldn't on her own.
Yeah, and she still remained in post as CEO. Um, and also, it helps on the psychological. And she did mute it to me afterwards. It's a gradual letting go over the 4 years. She's just kind of getting used to the fact that she's sold her shares.
Hmm.
So it's a long goodbye in a sense. And who wouldn't stay on in their business for another 12 million quid?
Well, many people would be convinced. This leads directly though into number 11, which is seller mindset. And
Yeah.
then number 12, you put, if you don't like them, period,
Yeah.
it's usually related to number 11. So would that be an example of seller mindset, or are you thinking about something else here?
No, I liked her. I think even though you can always tell, even though you challenge I'm a fellow business owner, so I feel like I can challenge the status quo and the mindset. They may still hold their view, but if you get a twinkle and a twinkle in their eye and a smile, you know they've kind of accepted that you could be right. They hope that they're right and you're wrong. Um, that's fine. I think where it's rare, there aren't many people that I've come across that I've thought no, but there are a few over 20 years. Um, and it's not a personality thing. It's how are they going to perform in front of a buy side team? If
Hmm.
they're arrogant, egotistical, closed in their mindset, it's going to be a hell of a job to sell that business. And so we do spend quite a bit of time. Most people will receive coaching before we put them in front of real buyers with real money. Um, we, some of them we coach them and then they forget the coaching and they revert to type in a meeting. So we get a pen and we dig them under the table with the pen. Um, I think sometimes it might be once a year. I come across a potential client and we don't share the values, and it isn't a taxi regulation. I just think they're not going to perform in the best sense of the world in front of potential buyers, and the likelihood of completing that transaction is minimal. And I don't want minimal chances because that's the reverse of our methodology. So I'd
Hmm.
rather let them go. It doesn't happen that often, but it happens sometimes.
So one of the things that, and I think this is important for people who are listening to understand, is that your firm's focus is on strategic acquisition. So
Yes.
these are businesses that we would often describe as middle market businesses, and you want buyers who are going to create synergies to make everything worth more,
Yeah.
and which is very different from a lot of small business sales where it's a financial buyer, someone who wants to leave a job and they want to come in and become the owner manager. Now, that being, and I wanted to just address that for a moment because you've got a couple of things here that you use to filter out weak buyers because you don't want to obviously waste time with someone who's not a good buyer. In my small business practice, oftentimes the buyer, we're looking for the right skill set because the buyer is going to become the manager, right? You've got a very short list here. There's only two things. And the number one thing I've already mentioned is that they have to be a strategic buyer, which means that somehow this acquisition will add to their, greater financial viability, whatever business they're in. But the second one here, well, I'll let you describe it. And this is a big topic lately on LinkedIn. What's the most important thing you look for in a buyer?
That they've got the money. Show me the money, Jerry Maguire said, didn't he?
He did.
Um, yeah.
And the reason this is such a big topic is that the number of people who Clinton Lee describes as 1 pound Charlies, the number of people out there who are making contacts with business owners and brokers who have no money is just growing exponentially, isn't it?
I know, yeah, and yeah, Clinton does affectionately refer. He loves them all, the 1 pound Charlies. We never meet them because what we're looking for are companies with a strategic advantage and a reason to buy who've got resources. It may be a mixture of funding sources, but you can already tell, you can already see proof of funding. So the people that have got plenty of ideas but no money never see the light of day with our clients. Never. What
And is
one way
this something that you've had to apply since you got started, or have you had this approach back from the beginning?
No, since we started, it's only really in the UK in the last 3, 4, 5 years that this has been a thing.
Hmm.
So we filter those out. Where they've got rather smart, because now when they make contact with us, usually by email, they describe themselves as private equity.
Hmm.
They're not a private equity firm. Well, they are. Is an individual with no money that calls themselves private equity. They may be a private investor, but they haven't got any money. And of course, the problem with people who haven't got any money that want to buy something, they have to find a funding source. And if they go externally to a bank, it's the bank that will value our client's business, not the person that's made contact. So that's not to say there are some private investors that have got the industry skill, experience, and expertise, and they've got money. So they've been successful in their previous business enterprises. They might get some supplementary funding. They might want our client to do a bit of vendor financing as well. And somewhere in the middle, there's a deal to be had. So it's not that we don't deal with private investors, but these are multimillionaires. They're self-made people who can actually show us a bank statement with the funds that they've got, or several bank statements. So yeah, it's a thing, but it's not the industry we occupy. Those people will just waste our time, and because what they want to do is buy a business for £1 or very little money up front, and that doesn't work for our clients. So one of the reasons why our average multiple earnings that we achieve for our clients is over nine times earnings of EBITDA, adjusted EBITDA as well, before you get in there, David. Real profit. And that's because we're hitting, we're concentrating and focus on strategic purchases where 1 and 1 equals 3 or 4 or 5. Mm-hmm. And I know I've mentioned to you, there are 2 multiples in a strategic purchase, not 1. There's the seller's multiple and there's the buyer's multiple. And part of our job is to unearth both of those, where we can find what our client's business will be worth to them over the next few years if they were lucky enough to buy our client's shares.
Right. Because in a strategic acquisition, the acquirer is going to be able to somehow create greater efficiencies, or maybe use the acquired business as a channel for other products they might have, or take the products from the acquired business into their other sales channels or something.
Yeah. And two client and 2 databases. So the sales guys now have got, and marketing have got 2 databases in which to upsell and cross-sell. So I think the highest one we had last year was a multiple of 26. You see, an accountant couldn't work; they would defy logic. So the deal went through.
You know, one of the things that we talked about last week is how you don't put an asking price on, and clearly this is the reason why, because you want a buyer to have an opportunity to get excited about what they're going to do with the acquisition, and which at the end of the day leads to a greater price for your client. And very distinctly, your position is that you represent the seller. I mean, this is your role, and it's, the buyer and their team, it's up to them to decide what they're going to do.
We let the market decide what our client's business is worth. That's not to say that we don't have some in-depth discussions with our client before we go to market. We get two numbers from our client. We get their minimum walkaway price, because we need to know what we're negotiating with. And we also get their aspirational price, the number they really want. And that's really important, because if there's more than one shareholder, we need to make sure they're in agreement, because they may not be. And we don't want it to unravel in front of a prospective buyer. So no, there is, I spent 40 years in sales. I know there's there's 2 schools of thought about price anchoring. We've taken a decision, well, me originally, because I was a one-man band, that I wouldn't advertise with a price, because it would create a ceiling. If we said offers in excess of 5 million, guess what we're not going to get? So I don't want to put a ceiling on a business because we're selling to strategic purchasers, which means if we typically get 8 buyers around the table, we get 4 offers. Those 4 offers will all be different. It's about 130% difference between the lowest and the highest offer. So
Mm.
we know that you can't value a business on a set of a P&L and a balance sheet, because otherwise those 4 buyers would come in roughly at the same price. They don't. And then we reject all 4 offers. We go back with a commercially reasoned argument as to why they should sharpen their pencil. And look,
Well,
when someone makes a first offer is never their best offer. Even if it's the headline price doesn't change, it might be the terms that change.
so and so a lot of the viewers of my channel are in the small business space. Just quickly, can you describe the average size of business that you're talking about here? Because this very much is middle
Yeah.
market
So
discussion.
we tend not to work with companies below 5 million US turnover.
So that's revenue for people
Revenue,
living
yeah,
outside of
sorry,
the
yeah,
UK.
revenue. $5 million revenue US. It's 5 to 30 million is our sweet spot. When I first started, it was anyone
Hmm.
that I thought I could sell. And I learned in the very small, the S of SME, it was a lot of hard work. It was harder than selling a larger business and less reward because we charge a 3% success fee. So who wants to work harder for less money? So
Right.
we've graduated 4 or 5 years ago. We moved the profile of the companies we're more interested in working with, and so we set that threshold. It does mean when we do meet companies that are below that minimum threshold, it's not that we say goodbye. If we think it's a saleable entity and they've got a realistic price, we'll forward that referral on to a couple of our brokers that work in that lower space. So I want them to be looked after.
Hmm.
So it's about choosing your market, isn't it? You can't be
It
everything to
is. It's
everyone.
about defining who you're going to work with. But I thought that the conversation here about how you vet your really okay. So a lot of the times when I describe to people a business brokerage business, I talk about how the seller's businesses become items of inventory on the broker's shelf. If you want to think of the business broker like a shopkeeper, right?
Yeah.
And so anyone who's operating a shop is going to decide what kinds of products they want to have on their shelves and what they want to be known for.
Yeah.
And if you decide that you're going to be selling the high-end ladies handbags, then you're not going to, fill your shelves with the, cheaper quality items, right? You're going to be very selective about which things that you put on the shelf. And and a lot of the operators in the brokerage industry in general, they don't have the luxury of doing that. They're just and I don't think a lot of business owners realize this, but there's a lot of people in the brokerage industry who are working really hard just to try to make that paycheck for themselves. And I think that money is not necessarily the greatest motivator in the world, but the lack of money will motivate people to do things they never thought they would do.
Yeah, and I know it's a different climate in North America because it's more success fee contingent based, whereas in the UK it's a different marketplace. It's normal to charge a retainer and then a success fee. That's the
Mm.
norm here. Although I was told when I set up in the UAE in Dubai, I was told that people don't pay retainers in Dubai. Well, they do. No one's ever asked for them. Because you know what, people will pay if they've got certainty or trust about an outcome.
Sure.
And it helps when you've spent 10 years and several hundred transactions, or 20 years and several hundred transactions. So people don't mind paying the retainer. They see that as quite fair in terms of you're engaging someone every month to work for you on this project called selling a business. So I love it when I'm told in a country, well, we don't do that here, Rob. And in fact, Evolution is going to operate in 14 other countries over the next 5 years. We're in the Middle East. We've got another 14 countries, including Canada and the US. You'll be pleased to hear. But people don't mind paying a premium. We are reassuringly expensive on our retainer. We found that we do less transactions, but the net margin is much higher. We can create a 40% net margin in a typical year.
Oh,
That's a good
wow.
business, and it also means that I can now retire at the old age of 57. I could retire this evening, but I choose not to because I love the work that I do. And I can sleep at night knowing that we're trying our best for our clients.
Mm,
And if they've gone through the American Gladiator and one of the 12 hurdles they've fallen at, we will help them because we will parachute in one of our mentors or consultants to help put that thing right in their business or number of things. So we don't say don't darken our door. We just say, look, we can't sell it for the price you're looking for. So you can
right.
either go to a competitor and spend money with them, or let's work with you. Let's put those things that we think are deal breakers or will hamper getting the price that you're looking for. Let's work together over the next year or two. That is I don't know about overseas, but that's quite an unusual model in the UK. A business sale transactor that also does consultancy and coaching. That's rare.
It's coming in North America because
Right.
especially with this pandemic,
Yeah.
because I know there's a lot of brokers out there who are seeing their activity decline, and one of the hot topics in the industry is creating other methods of revenue, including things like consulting work. But it's not every broker who's able to execute on that. It
No.
in a lot of ways is a different skill set. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. It was a great interview. And if people want to find you online, what's the easiest way for them to make contact with you?
The company above, just put .co.uk. You'll find me there. You've got my email address and my mobile number, cell number. Get in touch. Love to have a conversation. I'm running a group coaching initiative to help SMEs that are going to struggle through this, what's going to be quite an in-depth recession. I want to take 15 business owners around the world on a journey for 12 months. I'll coach them, and we're going to create a book at the end of the 12 months that'll supply a chapter each about the highs and lows of trying to grow a business in a recession. And then we'll publish on Amazon.
Oh, it'll be a great read.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
The content will come from business owners.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Rob. And for everyone out there, if you enjoy stuff like this, you should head over to davidcbarnett.com. On the left-hand side, there's a place to sign up for my email. I send out emails every day, and once a week, there's a new video digest where new interviews like this or other videos answering questions are released. And I'd be very happy to have you on the list. Thanks, Robert, and have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.